Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes a pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's fact. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 168 of the Last Round Podcast. Thank you again for joining us, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Geo7 in the country of India. So shout out to our listeners over there. We definitely appreciate it. Jumping right back into it, fight reviews this past Saturday, the 12th of March from the Nottingham Arena on DAZN. Lee Wood gets the 12th round knockout over Michael Conlan and retains his WBA world featherweight title. Conlan suffers the first professional loss of his career. And this is, I think you would agree with me, Mike, this is one of the leading contenders, if not the leading contender as of this moment for fight of the year. Definitely in the upper echelon of that conversation. Lee Wood initially in the first round was knocked down. It looked like Conlan was likely on his way to a victory, maybe an early night for him. And 11 rounds later, Lee Wood gets that straight right down the pipe and hits Conlan, just knocks his lights out. And then Conlan just kind of, his body just cripples like a spaghetti noodle, and he falls straight through the ring ropes. Luckily, he's okay, because he did fall like straight on his back, and it looked like he probably landed on his head or on the upper area of his neck. Luckily, he's okay. He's released some statements or some tweets or some social media posts, pretty much indicating that he's okay. And then there was pictures after and video after of both of them in a type of embrace. This is one of those fights that you want to show like a non-boxing fan or a casual fan. It was entertaining. At one point you thought, okay, Conlan's got it. And then the rounds keep going, and then it gets to the 12th and Lee Wood turns it around. It was pretty much one of those fights out of a movie, like you couldn't script it any better. Especially with Conlan, falling out of the ring. Like I said, luckily he's okay, but from a theater perspective, like the theater of boxing, you couldn't script it any better. It was exciting. The crowd was hot for it, and they were hot for that fight the whole night. Even the day before at the weigh-in. I mean, what'd you think? What'd you think about Lee Wood's performance, and where does Conlan go from here? And are you impressed with Conlan? Because you didn't pick him last week. You didn't think he was the real deal.
Probably one of the most dramatic, unbelievable comeback knockouts you'll ever see, in my opinion. Definitely one of the best fights I've watched for a long time. Definitely a candidate for fight of the year. Hopefully it's not beaten out by, a couple of guys who just have bigger names. But yeah, switching to the fight, Lee Wood started off, kind of slowly, and Conlan was really just like picking him off. Conlan looked, a lot better than his, recent performances. Lee Wood kind of grew into the fight. Got that knockdown, was it in the 10th or 11th, where, Conlan's corner, weren't too happy. They said it was more of a slip. But slip or not, he still caught him as he was going down, or which also made him go down. So it had to be counted as a knockdown.
That was my impression too. Like, it looked like he might have slipped, but the punch connected like at the same time. So it could have went either way. It looked like, okay, well, I think you were also knocked down by that punch. Like, it was hard to tell, but because the punch was like, it looked like it landed at the same time that he might have slipped. I was cool that it was ruled a knockdown as well.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see anything wrong with it. And his corner kept throwing water. Russ Abner, who was his cut man, every time Conlan was like walking to the corner to try to cool him down or whatever, he was constantly like flicking water at him. So if he'd have slipped, it's probably due to his corner anyway, because of the amount of water they'd put on the canvas. But yeah, that knockout was so strange, wasn't it? That the little right hand that Lee Wood threw just caught Conlan perfectly and literally just turned him off like a computer, didn't he? He just went down. And there's other punches where he obviously like probably caused a little bit more damage, but he was already out. I thought the zone did very well in kind of calming it down. There was no replays until they kind of knew what had happened. Good performance, I thought, from the medical team who had him, swiftly carted out to make sure he was good. Very, very professional. Good comeback from Lee Wood. And I know a lot of people were kind of jumping on and giving a lot of stick to Ben Davidson in his corner, saying that, he's finally become unstuck. And, he's, 1 minute he's the toast of the town. He's so good and his performances are great and he's really good at his breaking down fights. And then, he loses a couple of fights. Well, he didn't lose this, but his performance wasn't unbelievably great. And they're jumping all over him. At the end of the day, Lee Wood won. And I think a lot of people thought that Lee Wood was just heavy-handed.
Right.
And that's how he won. Conlan did win in terms of the boxing style, but Lee Wood just had to be perfect for that 1 second, and he managed to put his lights out, and he won in a great fight. And I'm sure Lee Wood will probably go on to bigger and better things and probably try to unify. But if he keeps winning and Conlan keeps winning, I think they should definitely circle back around and do it again, because that's one of those fights where you want to see a rematch. It's not one of those fights where it's in the contract. The fight was that good. We want to see the rematch.
So what about your previous take on Michael Conlan? Because you were in the camp that you didn't feel that he lived up to the hype that they were putting behind him. You didn't think he was going to pan out. You picked Wood to win, but it's not like Conlan went down easy. It was a great fight. So even in a loss for Conlan, is he the real deal to you now?
The funny thing is, it's hard to say because Lee Wood won that title out of nowhere. He wasn't picked to do that. There was times before where he was going to retire around British level. And it's going to be such a strange thing to say, but is Lee Wood really world title level? Kanzu was really got shown that he wasn't what people thought. And I'm waiting for Lee Wood to step up and face somebody, because it's maybe a strange thing to say, but is Conlan and Lee Wood, are they both really British or European level? Would you say that Lee Wood's fought some really good world-class, people, even though he is a world title holder? Not really. So maybe Conlan looked good against Lee Wood because essentially they're both actually British or European level.
I could see your point. I could see how you explain that. I can agree with that. It's possible. So you think that if either of them, especially Conlan, if he fights somebody from the United States or anybody like that, he doesn't hold up?
I don't see him against somebody that we as a boxing nerds would class as world level. I still think that Lee Wood, even though he's a WBA world title holder or whatever we're calling that WBA belt, is he really a legitimate world champion? He beat Kanzu, okay, but I think we'd all got a little bit high on Kanzu just because of his output.
Right.
When he fought Lee Wood, we were like, oh, okay, when he really has no plan B. And then Lee Wood's fought Conlan, who, in my opinion, I think he's British or European level. I don't. On his performances so far, okay, he did well in that fight, but he also lost. He still got knocked out. He didn't win the fight. So maybe I've been a little bit down on him, but prove me wrong. Get in there and and do it again. And Lee Wood still has something to prove. I do like him. I like the way that he fights. He's heavy-handed and obviously he gets the knockouts, but he still has something to prove at real world title level. He's not fought Santa Cruz or someone in the top 5 or the top 10 even maybe of the world title rankings.
What do you think about? Because I don't think we're going to see a rematch. Because Wood was a champion, and was Conlan the mandatory?
Yeah.
So I don't think we're gonna.
This was the WBA trying to, because you got the WBA Super, right, which I think is still with Leo Santa Cruz.
I guess. I really don't understand that situation. They must really like him.
The Wood essentially had the WBO regular, and then Conlan had that random WBA interim, which just came out of nowhere when there was already 2 world title holders. So why would you need an interim when they've just fought?
Yeah, that's weird. So assuming Conlan, they don't run this back, which I wouldn't expect them to. What about since he's top rank and, they top ranks seemingly have quite a decent crop of featherweights between 126 and 130. How about a potential matchup between Michael Conlan and Joet Gonzalez for top rank?
Good fight. Why not?
Right?
Yeah,
I think so.
Fight. Why not? Yeah, it's both of them have been, near, very close to the WBA and WBO world championships. So why not put them in together and see how it goes down. They've both been close to winning one, so put them in against each other. It's a good payday, right?
I could see that happening. Honestly, I could see Top Rank putting those two together. Who else do they have at 126? Navarrete?
Well, he's going to be hopefully fighting our boy Lara, right? That's what.
You also Matchroom also has Mauricio Lara. I'm telling you, man, Lara could be the dark horse in that whole division. As of right now, I think he is. I mean, he's got such power, and I mean, is there anybody else with that power? I think even if you put Lara against Wood or Conlan, I think Lara wins. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think again in those sorts of fights, I think they really are just too big. And stylistically they're not great to watch, but so big and so powerful, and there's only so much time that people can last against them. So it's an exciting division. It really is. Isaac Dogbe is another top rank one.
Oh, that's right, Dogbe. I can see them putting Conlan with him. That matchup. Joet Gonzalez.
Josh Warrington, Kiko Martinez, Kanzu, Joet Gonzalez, Christopher Diaz. I think he may still be top rank.
Is he?
I haven't seen him for a while, but he was, wasn't he?
Huh. I mean, yeah, you got Santa Cruz, but I don't think Santa Cruz really counts. I think you kind of take Santa Cruz out of the equation from this point forward. You can't really mention Santa Cruz as an opponent for anybody. You just can't anymore. He's reached some type of level or some type of point in the relationship with the WBA, Al Heyman, PBC, and all them, where he's kind of untouchable. He can kind of get what he wants. I mean, he doesn't really do interviews, or doesn't really post. He doesn't really, which is cool. Can't really say anything about him if he doesn't give you any type of content like that. But I don't think we can throw Santa Cruz into any fantasy matchups anymore. I think he's kind of over it. But so who does Lee Wood? We talked about Conlan potential matchups after this. Who does Wood fight after this? Lara?
Well, obviously you have the Kiko Martinez against Josh Warrington next weekend. So do they look at that as some kind of British? Whoever wins that, do they put in for a unification, WBA and IBF?
Maybe it's possible.
Easy enough to make, right?
Yeah, both Matchroom.
Yeah.
Either way, it's a pretty exciting division. I can understand your point, like I said, in terms of Conlan and Wood. Are they British level? Are they European level? Either way, it was a great fight. I don't know. I can acknowledge your point, but I think Conlan is better than we think. I do. Even though he lost, it was a great fight. It was a tough fight. But I can understand how you would look at it from that angle. Is it a European level or is it British level? I could see that. But I think he's got the goods. I'm sure eventually he's going to get a world title. Top Rank is very, very good at putting you in a position to get a world title. Giving you, if they like you, they'll strategically put you in a spot to get that world title. I mean, look at Jesse Magdaleno. You know, people forget about him, but he was one of those guys who had the world title and then he got beat. And he still fights, but you don't really hear anything about him after that world title. I think Conlan might be the same thing, at one point or another. He's got the Irish fan base, fights on he fights on St. Patrick's Day in New York and stuff like that. So, I mean, we'll see. But yeah, I don't expect a rematch. I think they're both going to go their separate ways, and we'll see what happens from there. Also on the card, Gary Coley remains undefeated with a knockout over Miguel Vasquez, 44-11. What'd you think about this matchup?
Good fight. Like we said, like Vasquez does blow hot and cold. I think it just depends on, how much time he gets before a fight and stuff like that. Because obviously you can tell, he's 55 fights into his career. Gary Cully honestly made really easy work of it.
I know.
Great performance from Gary Cully. I thought he looked really, really good. And Vasquez, he looked bad after that great performance against Lewis Ritson. Yeah, he really blows hot and cold, and he was definitely cold that night.
Rounding off the card, Terry Harper gets the 10-round unanimous decision win over Yamila Belen Abelanada. I don't know. I gave it a shot. This was for the vacant WBA Intercontinental Lightweight title. What do you think about Harper's unanimous decision win?
I thought the biggest thing taken from that was how her body looked. She looked ripped. She looked a lot more bigger and muscular than she did before. So whether that's something they've changed or whether it's because she's fighting at a different weight category, but yeah, she looked a lot different. She's obviously been working really, really hard, for this comeback. And typical kind of Terry Harper performance. She looked good, flashy at times, but still just lacks a little bit of power, which is what we said when she fought Alicia Bumgarner, that she just couldn't back her up. And obviously, eventually she just got caught by that big shot. So maybe that's something that Terry Harper needs to work on, and maybe that the added muscle and the stuff she's put on now, maybe that'll put a little bit more pop behind those punches.
Moving on, fight previews this upcoming Saturday, the 19th of March, from the Duty Free Tennis Stadium in Dubai. Duty Free Tennis Stadium. What a name that is. Right. I believe this is a Probellum card. Sonny Edwards, 17-0, goes up against Mohammed Wasim, 12-1. This is for the IBF flyweight world title. What do you think about this matchup?
I think everyone's just hoping that Sonny Edwards wins so we can see him in there with Julio Cesar Martinez. That's the one that everyone's calling for. Eddie and Sonny did an interview recently on IFL TV where Eddie's kind of, jokingly said, like, if you behave yourself and stop talking shit, essentially, we'll give you the fight in the summer. So, fingers crossed, because that's literally, a bull and a matador kind of fight. So that's a great one, which would unify the IBF and the WBC. So I see Sonny probably doing his usual work and boxing rings around Mohammed Wasim and winning probably a fairly good, points decision, a fairly wide points decision. And then hopefully we get that big fight in the summer.
And then Regis Prograis, former world champion at 140 pounds, returns to the ring as he goes up against Tyrone McKenna on this card. What do you think about this matchup? And does Regis Prograis signing with Probellum help his image in terms of publicity and stock?
The match, starting with the match, I think this could be one of those, the sneaky undercard fights that steals the show. Because obviously we know that we know a lot about, Regis Prograis, been in there with Josh Taylor, really good, loves the fight, always, performs really, really well. Tyrone McKenna never backs down from a fight himself. Big chance for him against, Regis Prograis to get a really good name on his ledger. So this is definitely one that I would want to watch on the undercard. Do you know what? Regis Prograis, for me, he's kind of like Zepeda, like we talk about Zepeda is. He had that fight against Josh Taylor where everyone was like, you know what, we need to run this back. Even though Regis Prograis lost, he kind of sold himself to the British fans, did a lot of media, great performance. And it's one of those things where you're like, you know what, I need to capitalize on this and I need to strike while the iron's hot. And he didn't. He's been calling everybody out. Broner, like he was supposed to fight Mikey Garcia, but Mikey Garcia ended up getting beaten. Everybody just looking for like another big payday. It's like Khan when Khan was waiting for the Pacquiao Floyd Mayweather fight. You're like, really, just get in there and fight, dude. Like, he's had a couple of like comeback fights, hasn't he, on smaller cards against people where he kind of just fought them at like 144 pounds, 145 pounds instead of, doing it at 140 or 147. But just get in there and fight. You can't sit and wait. Look at Khan. Khan wasted a long time doing that. These fights aren't necessarily going to materialize. So just get in there and start beating people. Go back on another title run that he claims he wants to. Maybe he will. When when Josh Taylor vacates all the belts at 140, maybe he's like, all right, I'll go back and pick another one up now.
Do you think that Regis Prograis was approached or was courted by promoters? Al Heyman, Top Rank, stuff like that. Or do you think that he didn't have too many options and Probellum came along and he said, oh, I'll go with Probellum? Or do you think he voluntarily went with Probellum over the other ones?
Look at it from the outside, like we said about he always seems to be waiting for that big payday. I'm sure he probably just looked at the people and assessed who he could make the most money with, which isn't wrong, but
right.
Everyone's their own business and you have to make as much money as you can. But yeah, I can see so, especially like if you're at like Top Rank, they really have like the 140 sewn up, don't they? So like, why would you not want another piece of that pie like PBC did with 147?
That's what I was thinking. But even if he signed with PBC, eventually he was going to move up to 147.
Yeah, so he said, yeah.
They have all the players too. So I mean, I don't know. Obviously, he knows why he made the decision to sign with Probellum, but I mean, all of his fights essentially are going to be in Dubai or in that general area, which I don't think helps his stock. I mean, like you said, I'm sure they're paying him. I'm sure he's he weighed it and from different aspects, and he's getting paid pretty well. But in terms of helping his image and growing his stock, especially like you said, he had a lot of momentum after fighting in the UK. Josh Taylor and that was a good fight too. That was a great fight. And then he was on some Triller cards over here and stuff like that. But I feel like that momentum really slowed down. I mean, maybe I know, obviously we hear these fighters all the time go back and forth, or promoters saying, oh, we've offered this fight, we'd offer that fight. Like Charlo-Munguia, Showtime president Steven Espinoza comes out and tweets some stuff, and then De La Hoya responds and says he wants the zone involved. We'll touch on that later, but maybe they're denying him. Maybe they're rejecting his offers, or because wasn't Regis Prograis with Lou DiBella at one point? Is he still with him?
He was originally with Lou DiBella, and then he either was rumored to or briefly signed with PBC, I think.
You think you're right? Yeah, I think you're right. But DiBella did sign some type of deal or partnership with Probellum recently. But I don't know if Regis Prograis is still working with DiBella. I haven't heard anything different, but it's possible that they don't have any type of agreement anymore, right?
I don't think so. I don't believe so.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, obviously he did what was best for him, but I'd be very interested to see if there was any conversations with like Top Rank or PBC, Matchroom, stuff like that. And if there was, what was the tipping point to go to Probellum? Was it, I'm assuming it was money. Like they just offered him more money and he's like, oh, well, I'll go over here, but who knows? Who knows? Moving on. Also, this upcoming Saturday from the USC Galen Center at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles on DAZN. Originally, it was supposed to be headlined by Virgil Ortiz Jr. Against Michael McKinson. But earlier this week, it was announced that Virgil Ortiz had withdrawn from this fight because he suffered. Do you know how to pronounce it? How do you say it?
Rhabdomyolysis.
Rhabdomyolysis. I know we tweeted about it, but can you describe what it is for our listeners who might not be aware of what it is?
From what we've heard so far, I think it sounded like Virgil went into camp like a little bit heavy. So he was doing, a lot of working out, which can lead to, complications in the stomach where was it like protein gets out and starts to attack the body essentially, and, can cause some, I'm not a doctor, so that's just what I read on Google. But yeah, it sounds like, if not caught early or, can sometimes be, pretty bad. So hopefully he has a mild case and it'll only be a few weeks, and then hopefully he'll come back, and we'll hopefully see a rearranged match, I guess. Or will he have to move up? Is it something now where he's too big for that weight division? Or
you know what? You're right. I thought about that too when I heard the news. I was like, is he gonna have to move up to 154? His dad, Roger Ortiz Sr., also tweeted out or put out something where he said, he's like, I noticed it. He's like, I know my son, and I noticed he wasn't the same, so I took him to the hospital, and luckily, they treated it and they found it before it got worse. I think that's a logical point of conclusion to make. It's like, okay, you know what? Maybe we should move up. Maybe we should move up to 154. You're getting older, and it's, the older you get, it's a little bit more difficult to make certain weights. But it's tough. He's so close to getting a world title shot at the 147-pound division, which is one of the most lucrative divisions in the sport. And if that happens where he's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I have to move up. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, eventually he'll get a shot, even if it has to be at 154. But it's kind of like, oh man, you worked all that time to make a dent at 147 pounds, and your body just said, oh no, you have to move up. It's possible. I think that's a good point that you brought up. He might have to move up. Who knows? But obviously we wish him well. But there was a press release released by Golden Boy that we received that said that he's expected, I believe, to make a full recovery. So that's good news. But luckily they found a replacement opponent for Michael McKinson. Initially, the co-main event was Lex Rocha, a friend of the show. He's been on the show before, previous times, against Blair Cobbs. This is gonna be a good matchup. This is still on the show. It's been elevated to the main event. But I was really looking forward to this fight. It's two Golden Boy fighters, kind of putting them together and see who comes out on top. And Blair Cobbs, the WWE personality who's also been on the show, he made a video and put it out there and called out Michael McKinson to fight him, and to kind of see if he can get that main event spot. And then Alexis Rocha released his own video calling out Blair Cobbs. He's like, no. He's like, you signed up to fight me. He's like, don't run away. He's like, you're gonna fight me. And I never thought that was gonna be real. I never thought that Golden Boy was gonna elevate Cobbs to the main event to fight McKinson. I didn't think that was gonna happen. If anything, I think they would have elevated Rocha, but I'm kind of glad that they didn't touch that fight and they're letting those two fight. Like I said, they did elevate it to the main event. So that was one of the, I was probably looking forward to that fight the most, that even more than the main event. So yeah, as of right now, that event is still going forward. I'd be interesting to see how the ticket sales go. How many people are going to ask or have asked for their refunds. I have a friend who was going with some buddies, and he was texting me about it and saying he was thinking about getting a refund because he was looking forward to see Virgil Ortiz. And I told him, I was like, well, it's still a good card. Go out in LA, have a night out, go to the fights, go out and, hang out in the city right there. But it sucks, but that's what happens in combat sports, especially where, these fighters, something happens the week of the fight or the day of the fight or a couple of weeks before the fight, and, everything changes. So yeah, like I said, it's still going to happen on DAZN. I'm sure DAZN's not that happy though. Obviously it's not their fault. Ortiz, it's not his fault, but yeah, it sucks because Ortiz, after this fight, probably should have, if he won, should have been lined up for a type of world title shot. And now, either, like you said, he either moves up to 154 because of this incident, or he gets another comeback fight, to kind of get his bearings back into the ring. And we don't see him in a world title matchup until next year. What do you think is the logical pathway here?
Hopefully he can come back and campaign at 147, because there's some great matchups there, isn't there? We've always wanted to see him in there with like your Keith Thurmans. Who else would be logical? Like Crawford. All those guys, because it's just some real killers. 147 is that division. Because of Floyd and Manny Pacquiao over the last few years. That it's one of the divisions that we look at. But even at 154, 160, whatever he eventually moves up to, there's some good fights there for him as well. But
right.
I think we all thought that he would probably campaign at 147 first, at least have a shot at a world title, and then move up. But whatever he's got to do to keep himself safe, and make that. But it's a good fight regardless. If he comes back and has to fight McKinson, but hopefully he's back soon. Hopefully it's just a mild dose, and then he's back, because he's great to watch.
No, right. So luckily they found him a replacement opponent. I believe his name is, let me see if I can find it. Because I know initially there was reports that Golden Boy Promotions had submitted a name or so to the California State Athletic Commission for approval. But I'm not sure if the commission approved it. But let me see if I can find out who the replacement is. I believe his name is Juan. I'm sorry, not Juan. Okay, so yeah. So this was a tweet at this point from ESPN's Mike Coppinger. Said that Michael McKinson's new opponent is Jesus Antonio Perez Campos. And that fight, McKinson's fight, moves to the co-main event, and Alexis Rocha and Blair Cobbs moves up to the main event. Hopefully Cobbs Rocha has some fireworks. Hopefully McKinson and Campos has some fireworks. For the people who are going to that fight at USC right there, as long as there's some entertaining fights, especially those last two fights, the co-main event, main event, maybe some knockouts, back and forth action that kind of gets them on their feet cheering and, having a good time, I think everybody goes home happy, and regardless, Golden Boy, especially in the LA area, they usually put on some pretty good fights that are entertaining. Sometimes you might not be aware of the fighters, but, they don't have the name recognition, which a lot of fighters don't at this point, but Golden Boy has a pretty decent reputation to put on some pretty exciting fights in the Los Angeles and Southern California area. So it should still be a good matchup, good event. Hopefully it delivers, even though they lost their main event and they lost obviously the star of the event in Virgil Ortiz Jr. But also on this card, he is still on this card as of this recording. Beck the Bully, 8-1, goes up against David Zagara. Is this Beck the Bully's first time out since being okay? This is his second fight since his loss to Gabe Rosado, right?
Yeah, second fight back against another opponent. I think just to get him a few rounds in. The first one back was against Sergei Ekimov, which was just an 8-rounder. This is scheduled to be a 10-rounder with someone with a lot of experience. 34-7, so 41 professional fights. I think they've maybe decided that Beck needs a little bit more experience before throwing him in there with some more experienced guys, because, yeah, like you said, Gabe Rosado managed to do a number on him. That Golden Boy and everybody in this area were really high on him, and it's a kind of a shock loss to old Gabe Rosado there.
But then Gabe Rosado got a Munguia fight. I'm sure he got an okay payday right here in Southern California and Anaheim, California at the Honda Center. But yeah, I wonder if Gabe Rosado is still signed to Golden Boy, or was it like a 1 or 2 fight deal or something like that?
Yeah, I think he probably is. He lives in his area now. He has a gym in LA, so kind of makes sense to sign with Golden Boy and, keep himself in Southern California, because Golden Boy really do 90% of their fights in this local area, right?
Yeah. They're pretty much, they put on all their fights here in Southern California. It's pretty common for them. Also, this upcoming weekend from the Madison Square Garden Theater in New York City on ESPN Plus, Edgar Berlanga, 18-0, returns to the ring as he goes up against Steve Rolls, 21-1. This is for the WBO NABO super middleweight title. Steve Rolls, obviously, his only loss at this point in his career is against Gennady Triple G Golovkin. So be prepared, Mike. Be prepared that the ESPN Plus commentators will be mentioning Triple G's name a lot during this broadcast in order to create some type of connection to Berlanga, especially if Berlanga beats him and knocks him out and beats him faster than Triple G did. Be prepared, like, he stopped him faster, or he beat him faster than Triple G did. That has to be something. What do you think about this matchup?
Not a bad matchup for Berlanga. Obviously, they're still building him very slowly. Steve Rolls really has a little bit of a cooked resume with 21 wins and only one loss. A lot of his fights have been over in Canada, so it's not like you said. They're hoping that Berlanga just gets the knockout and does it earlier than Triple G to kind of build some sort of narrative. Maybe to hope that Triple G fights Canelo, and then maybe Berlanga manages to gets his hands on him or something like that, and they're probably hoping that it's one fight too many for Triple G, and Berlanga can hopefully get some kind of shock victory over him later down the line. But still slowly but surely, I think for Berlanga, he seems to be somebody that really attracts a lot of the fans, and I'm sure they're going to pick very wisely for him so they can keep using him and MSG with that huge Puerto Rican fan base in that area. Once you've watched a lot of boxing, you realize what they do, right? They'll do that with him. They'll do that with Wood-Conlan. It's a business. So they'll, move him slowly but surely.
Yeah, definitely is a business. I'm interested to see if Berlanga comes out swinging, because obviously he had that first round knockout streak for a while. Is he going to try to do the same to try to get back on that same pathway, or is he going to be a little bit more patient and try to look for the knockout in the middle to later rounds, or just look for an opening? Or is he going to, like I said, is he going to try to end it in the first round? If he really makes an attempt to end it in the first round, like he really goes for it, like he has in a lot of his past fights, I don't think that's a good sign. At this stage in his progression. But I don't expect him to. I think he's going to be patient and look for it, obviously, and see what he can do. But I'd be very surprised if he really tries to end it in the first round like he has before.
I don't know if he will. I mean, last time out, he had that pretty poor performance against Marcelo Esteban, is it Cosellas, where Berlanga was dropped. He was dropped in the 9th round. And
right.
Some people, actually had him, either winning it by a round, losing it by a round, maybe even calling it a draw. In that fight, he didn't look too good.
Right.
So I don't know whether is Berlanga gonna be like, okay, let's calm it down. Like, that streak's gone now. Let's just concentrate on the boxing, and the openings will come, and then I'll take it. Instead of pushing and trying to create something that's not not coming, that's not there. So Steve Rolls is probably a good opponent for him. He's got 21 wins, only 12 by knockout, and he's 37 years old. And look at his last 2 fights. He fought Christian Brooker, 16-8, Gilberto Pereira dos Santos, 16-10. So you can see his record is slightly padded, shall we say.
Yeah, trying to get back in the win record. It's like when fighters like your pound for pound great Chris Lovejoy, takes a loss and then goes to Mexico and just has a bunch of fights to get back in the win column and kind of up those rankings in a bit, or up those rankings a little bit, to try to get back in a position to get some type of payday. I mean, we'll see. We'll see. But obviously, Steve Rolls is people might recognize his name, like I said, because he fought Triple G a couple years ago on this zone. It was in front of no crowd, I believe. It was during the pandemic. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Berlanga's still young. He obviously has a developing fan base that they can work with there in New York. So Top Rank is hoping that it pans out and see what they can do with him in terms of the business side of boxing. Also on the card, prospect Xander Zayas comes up against Quincy Lavias, 12-2-1. Obviously, they're still progressing. Zayas and he was at the Ryan Garcia kickoff press conference for his fight against To Go a couple weeks ago in downtown LA. I think we have some. I think our photographer Luis Mejia, shout out to him on Twitter, Al Mejia Photography. He's been helping us out and going to some events and getting some great shots for us. But I remember he sent us a picture and it was Xander Zayas. I was like, oh, that's interesting. He's a Top Rank guy and he was there, but maybe he's friends with Ryan or he was in the area and he asked if he can go. So, it's fighters show up. It's like Jesse Vargas. Jesse Vargas would always show up at a bunch of different, like I would go to different like press conferences or media workouts or, stuff like that. And Jesse Vargas would always be there. And I'm like, oh, aren't you promoted by this guy? Like he would find a way to, I give it to him because then he would get interviews. He get his like publicity and, I give it to him. He was strategic, but it was always interesting. I was like, oh, there he is. Like, if I got there and I didn't see Jesse Vargas, I'd be surprised.
Open your fridge, and there's Jesse.
I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Also, this upcoming weekend from the Wembley Arena in London on ESPN Plus as well, David Avanesian, 28-3-1, goes up against Oskari Metz. This is for the EBU, European welterweight title. That's another alphabet title right there. Is Avanesian still promoted by Golden Boy?
Avanesian's like Frank Warren now.
Oh, is he?
But it's just one of those things, like he's been shouting this. He wants Conor Baird. He's been shouting out all these names. But then he goes with Oskari Metz. It's just kind of like a bit of a downfall. I understand, obviously, that it was supposed to be Virgil Ortiz against David Avanesian. And even though that was ordered somehow, some way, Virgil Ortiz got to refuse it. So they gave him Mickinson. I thought if it was a mandatory, surely you have to fight them or you lose your spot. But I'm not too sure how that. Yeah, I'm not too sure how that works.
You know how the rankings are. A couple people in the business have told us how the rankings work. So, you just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I want this guy here. I want this guy here." So
it looks like obviously David Avanesian's just going to have a little soft touch until he can get that big payday. Avanesian's he's 32, 33 years old. He's looking for a Conor Benn payday or some big kind of payday. And then, maybe just ride off into the sunset or something like that. He's trying to do it the smart business sense, I think.
Right. No, yeah, I agree with that. I think that's what he's the pathway that he's trying to create for himself. Also on the card, Hamza Shiraz, 14-0, goes up against Jez Smith. This is for the vacant WBC International Silver middleweight title. Man, where are these belts coming from? I feel like that's a new one that I've never. I don't know. I don't know where the hell these belts come from. I feel like they just like, oh, we need to add another belt. Add that one. All right, approved. Board of directors vote yes. All right, it's in. I feel like that's what happens. I don't know why. And then also Dennis McCann, 11-0, goes up against Charles Tondo. What do you think about these two matchups? Hamza Shiraz and Jez Smith, and McCann and Tondo.
The Hamza Shiraz fight will actually be interesting because obviously he struggled with Bradley Skeet. He struggled with Bradley Skeet, who's a bit of a boxer. And Jez Smith, on his day can box. It just really depends on whether, Jez comes in, in shape and stuff like that. So depending on how long he's had for camp and, where it depends how he's been, during COVID and stuff like that. This should be a decent fight for him, actually, because I think Shiraz got a little bit, maybe exposed is a little bit strong of the word when he fought Bradley Skeet, but it looks like he does struggle with people that can literally box and move. Dennis McCann, love him. Probably be easy work for Dennis against Charles Tondo. I was sat chatting to his coaches at the Chocolatito and Martinez weigh-in. Yeah, and obviously really, really high on him, said that he's got everything, he's down-to-earth kid, he trains super hard, they have to stop him from overtraining, he just loves it that much. So, that was great to hear from me, because I love watching him, and if he stays like that, then I'm sure he'll go on to, be a really, really good world champion.
Right. No, I get it. News and notes. Vasily Lomachenko and his team are in the process of seeking some type of approval to train for his proposed bout against George Kambosos for the unified titles at 135 pounds, which the fight would take place in Australia, George Kambosos' backyard. Obviously, with the situation going on in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, Lomachenko, along with Usyk and the Klitschko brothers, are involved in that conflict. I think they. I don't know if there's like a rule. I think there's like a
there's a rule. Ukraine, I think it's 18 to like 30 or 35. It's mandatory to pick up arms if they go to war.
Yeah, so they have to sign up. So he's seeking approval to train for this fight and pretty much kind of get out of it. So, I'd be interesting to see how that happens. I don't think. I don't know. It's a 50-50 shot, because the Ukraine might look at it as like, pride for the country. We need something that people can look forward to keep their spirits alive, even though this is happening over here. And what better way than to have one of the best fighters in the world, who is Ukrainian, to go and fight. And possibly, our people can watch it. Our Ukrainian people, not just in the Ukraine and Russia, but all around the world, can watch it and be prideful that one of their own is going after world titles again and could possibly win. And, it's another proud moment for Vasily Lomachenko and his countrymen and women. I think it's a 50-50 shot. But if you ask me, I don't think the Ukraine allows it. But I don't know. I go back and forth on it. I'm 50-50. But if you ask me right now, I don't think Ukraine allows it. And I think Kambosos and Haney happens. I think at this point, Kambosos Haney is a lot more likely than Kambosos Lomachenko. What do you think?
I'm going to go the other way. I think that Lomachenko, for representing them at the Olympics and everything he's done so far with boxing, and his father, obviously training the Olympic squad and stuff like that. I think that, if he asks for it, I'm sure he's probably in such good standing in that country, as, all the stuff that he's done, all the eyes that he brings to sport in the Ukraine, that they let him. If he asks, I think they'll let him.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't see it. I don't see them letting Lomachenko, releasing him from his duties in that conflict. But like I said, I don't know. I'm 50-50 on it. As of right now, I don't see it. But I could change my mind on it. But as I put my money that they won't let him, just because, you kind of let one person, away to do something else. Are more people going to start asking, like, well, you let this boxer go do his thing. What about us? We deserve to kind of get away too. Some people, because like you said, there's a mandate, like, people, or is it men between like 18 and like 35 or 40 or something like that. By law, they have to, I think they declared martial law. So by law, they have to fight, like how many people don't, like, well, they prefer not to fight. Obviously, they prefer not to fight, but they're just like, well, I have to go, or else they're going to arrest me and discipline me or something. So, Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, honestly, if you, I think Lomachenko is the big favorite if he fights Kambosos, and I think Lomachenko wins. I honestly, in terms of competitiveness lined up together, I think a Kambosos Haney fight is actually a little bit more appealing from a competition standpoint. But that's just my opinion. That's just my opinion. But we'll see. We'll see. But I think, like I said, I think Haney ends up landing the fight. But if he doesn't, Lomachenko figures it out. I'll admit I was wrong. Also, news and notes. Showtime recently announced their schedule for the next few months. I'm going to list the fights. Actually, they have a fight next weekend. Well, we'll start with that one, but I'm going to list all the fights that they've announced and the dates, and then the potential locations. And then you tell me which ones stick out in your mind and, kind of expand on them. March 26th in Minneapolis, Tim Tszyu, 20-0 and 50 KOs, goes up against Terrell Geisha, 22-2-1. That's next Saturday in Minneapolis, the Armory. It's been a while since they went to the Armory in Minneapolis, I believe. And then April 9th from the Virgin Hotels in Las Vegas, Nevada, Erickson Lubin goes up against Sebastian Fundora of Coachella, California. 12 rounds for the WBC interim super welterweight title. I actually like that fight. We'll come back to that. I think that's a good one. It's a good step up for Sebastian Fundora, the 6'6" welterweight at 147 pounds. Also on that card, Tony Harrison goes up against Sergio Garcia. April 16th from AT&T Stadium in Texas, Showtime pay-per-view. Errol Spence Jr. goes up against Yordenis Ugas. This is for the, I was going to say undisputed. It's actually unified for Spence's IBF and WBC World Championship titles, and Ugas's WBA Super Welterweight title. That should be a great fight too. Both world champions, unification matchup, and then it's who else is left? Crawford. Can't, if you're that close to getting an undisputed fight, if Crawford doesn't really get the fight, especially if it's Spence, but if it's Ugas, regardless who it is, I'm assuming that Spence has a rematch clause. I'd be interested to know if that's included in the contracts. So if Spence loses, he gets rematch, I'm assuming. But either way, if Crawford doesn't really get the fight after this, whoever wins this fight, they really have an agenda against him. Like, they really don't want him to get a piece of any of that revenue. May 14th in the Los Angeles area, that's likely. Brian Castano goes up against Jermell Charlo. This is for Castano's WBA and Charlo's IBF, WBA, and WBC 154-pound world titles. This is an undisputed matchup. This was supposed to happen, I believe, last month, but what was it? Was it Castano suffered an injury in training, so they had to postpone it? Reportedly, obviously we don't know if that really happened or not, but they rescheduled it for May, so I'm looking forward to that. And then Jaron Ennis, 28-0, goes up against Castillo Clayton. That's also on the card. This is an IBF welterweight elimination matchup. Let's see where Ennis lands after this. Ennis and Ortiz and those guys, Conor Benn. I think it's time. I think it's time to put him in there with some type of bigger name. May 21st, somewhere in the Phoenix area, David Benavidez goes up against David Lemieux in a super middleweight matchup. May 28th from the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York, Showtime pay-per-view. Tank Davis, Gervonta Davis returns as he goes up against Rolly Romero. This was originally supposed to happen a couple months ago, but obviously Rolly had some issues with the law. Looks like no charges were filed. So Mayweather Promotions and now Heyman and PBC giving him another chance and putting him back in there. I'm really interested to see how this performs on pay-per-view. Wouldn't look good if Tank Davis has 2 back-to-back pay-per-views. And, I think it's going to be a while before they come back to LA too. I don't think they're going to come back to LA for a fight with Tank Davis for a while. And then June 4th, once again in Minneapolis, Stephen Fulton Jr. goes up against Danny Roman for Fulton's WBC and WBO 122-pound titles. That's a great matchup. That's probably my favorite from this list. Definitely top two, maybe the number one. June 18th, somewhere in Houston, Jermall Charlo is going up against Selecki. This is for Charlo's WBC middleweight title. This one's unfortunate because there was a whole Munguia talk, and Espinoza says that they made an offer to Golden Boy and they wanted it on regular Showtime, and that Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya, came and said they wanted it on DAZN, and they wanted it to be a joint pay-per-view. Obviously, they can go back and forth. We don't really know who's telling the truth, but if what the statements that Steven Espinoza has made on Twitter and all that stuff, if that's all true, it doesn't look good for Golden Boy. Because Espinoza tweeted that he's like we gave them an offer, and we even said that okay, if Charlo loses, there's a rematch clause, then the rematch goes to DAZN. DAZN has the full broadcast rights. And then Espinoza also said that for this first fight, DAZN would have the UK and Mexico and the rest of the world rights to watch. I don't know. We were that close to this fight. We were that close, and then reportedly Munguia and Charlo actually agreed. They were on board. But then the broadcasters got involved, and I don't know. Is it because Golden Boy lost Canelo Alvarez, so it's a little bit more timid in these business negotiations? Who knows? We don't know who's telling the truth, but just going by those tweets, obviously it's a he said situations here or whatever. But if Espinoza is telling the truth from all these tweets and all these statements and all that stuff, it doesn't really look good on the Golden Boy side if that's all accurate. And then also the last fight announced on this announcement on July 9th, somewhere in San Antonio. This is also a great matchup too. Mark Magsayo, recent winner, or recent world champion, right? Of the Philippines, goes up against Ray Vargas of Mexico. This is for Magsayo's WBC featherweight title. So of all these fights I just went through the list, which one stands out to you?
Stephen Fulton, Danny Roman.
That's a good one. Why?
Stephen Fulton obviously is someone coming up that we've all, I think, been really high on. Danny Roman would be, I don't know what you'd call it, undisputed in two different sections, I guess, because he's already held the IBF and the WBA. So if he ends up beating Fulton, he would have held the WBC and the WBO as well. So he would have, not simultaneously, but, he would have held all of the 4 titles in that weight division, which should be some achievement for him, because me and you know him from the Thompson's boxing scene in, Southern California. So that would be something great for us to see. I would say probably second on there is probably Castaño and Jermall Charlo, just because of the fact that it was a toss-up the first time. Castaño was very close to beating Charlo. So that would be a great fight to run it back. And then probably top 3, Errol Spence, Yordenis Ugas, because that would obviously unify 3 of the belts. And like you touched on, everybody in the world who is a boxing fan will be like, okay, there's one more belt to go. Let's do it. Let's see Spence, Crawford for all the titles, for all the money, for everything in that division. And I think hopefully that's enough pressure on everybody involved to finally make it.
No, right. I like this list. I mean, Showtime's the only one the last couple of years, especially, who comes out and, announces fights that are scheduled for the next couple months and stuff like that. Which I like it. It adds mystique to, the whole boxing game, but I definitely agree with the Magsayo, Danny Roman. That's a great matchup. Ray Vargas, Stephen Fulton Jr., right? That's a great matchup. I'm definitely looking forward to that. Spence Ugas. Regardless, there's some good matchups on here. There's some really good matchups. Fundora, Erickson, Lubin. Those are good matchups. I overall, I think it's a strong list. I think it's a strong list, strong matchups. Hopefully, none of these fighters pull out, or there's no injuries. And they all happen as expected. But the one that really just kind of gets me is the Charlo and Selecki. I think we were so close to getting Charlo-Munguia, and everybody was excited for that. Just because it was a point where both of them were going to have some type of test. They were like decent names in the division, and I was excited for it. I was excited, and then like Munguia released something on social media saying he was still negotiating and blah blah blah. And there was reports that Munguia agreed, and then Charlo agreed, but then Golden Boy wanted the zone involved, and Showtime didn't initially want it on pay-per-view, but they proposed regular Showtime, and then allegedly De La Hoya and Golden Boy proposed, oh, we need the zone involved joint broadcast pay-per-view, which was, if that's true, and you tell me if you agree with me or not, I'm very surprised about that, because with as many pay-per-views as Showtime has been doing, I thought initially, I was like, oh, well, it was obviously Showtime that proposed the pay-per-view for this fight. But if you go by what Steven Espinoza says, he says that they proposed regular Showtime and they were countered with a joint pay-per-view, which, like I said, I think, let me ask you this, because I know we talked about this off air when this happened. We found out this news. If Golden Boy still had Canelo Alvarez with that stream of income of his fights 2 or 3 times a year, would this fight have gotten signed and been on regular Showtime?
I think so. I mean,
it's hard.
You'd like to think so. I mean, they can't do that many pay-per-views. We're already, as boxing fans, getting kind of peeved off, and then everyone was having a go at DAZN about them also coming into the pay-per-view market. So it did look like Showtime and Fox were going to pretty much do, like, it looked like either a pay-per-view every month or every other month, didn't it, when they first kind of like scheduled their lineup. So let's hope that they don't and we're all wrong, or because pay-per-views really should be kept for those big fights that the purses are so high that unfortunately we need the money from the fans to help pay those fights. But we did kind of get away from that with having pay-per-views for those heavyweights at Christmas, and Derek Chisora, Joseph Parker, and people like that, which in all reality should really be paying pay-per-view for guys like that. Probably not, but purses just got out of hand over the last few years.
Yeah, that's what it is. Is that the purses? It's like the purses have got out of hand. Like, yeah, the boxers get paid, but that money is passed down to us, the consumer. So who really wins here? Like, that's why all these MMA guys and all these like YouTubers and social media influencers are coming to boxing. Like, oh, I can make a ton of money, and then that's why there's this big old, I guess, conflict right now between MMA and Dana White and the UFC, saying, hey, you're not paying us. Boxing's making, we're big stars over here too, and these boxers are making 10 times what I'm making, or whatever. And sometimes they're less well known than I am, and I'm a bigger star over here at the UFC. But and the UFC already has a ton of pay-per-views. I mean, they're $1 billion company, so if that model goes to the UFC, if they start paying these MMA fighters the same way that these boxers are getting paid, does the pay-per-view model over there go up in price? They just raised it this year.
Yeah.
Do they raise it again? Like, okay, well, we have to pay for these purses, so instead of $75 or whatever it is right now, we're gonna have to raise it to 100. Which I think we're slowly getting there. So, and with inflation right now and everything that's happening, high gas prices, nobody wants to hear that. So it's hard, man. It's a we want to see these fighters get paid, but then like that's passed down to the consumer, so we're especially when these pay-per-views, paying $80 a fight. There's like 4 or 5 pay-per-views a year that you want to watch, paying $80. It's tough, but Yeah, like I said, going back to that list, it's a great list. I think it's a solid streak of matchups. So credit to Showtime Sports, Showtime Boxing, and Steven Espinoza over there. That was a lot of work probably to get all those fights signed and sealed and delivered and announced like that. So, good for them. And sticking with boxing like that. Hopefully they don't fold or they don't go out of the business like HBO Boxing did. That wouldn't be good for the sport. But like I said, I can't get over this Charlo-Munguia, scenario. I wish that fight was happening. I was so happy because I thought, we're at the finish line. We're almost there. We're going to run through the finish line, at the end zone, but 1 yard line essentially, but it didn't work. That's a American football analogy. So I apologize to our international listeners. What would the analogy be for football, soccer, instead of 1 yard line and 1 yard line for football, finish line?
Like a tap in, I guess, like on the goal line, like a tap in for soccer.
Okay, so that's what it is.
Football.
That's what it is. For our international listeners, there's your analogy. So, but either way, I'm glad they announced a bunch of fights. I'm excited. Hopefully they all pan out. But once again, guys, thank you again for listening. I know the last couple of weeks we haven't had a guest, or the last 2 weeks or so, I believe. Obviously the guests that we've had lined up, we've had some scheduling issues. So hopefully next week we have a guest back on in next week's episode, and we kind of get some schedules coordinated and lined up a little bit better. But as we begin to sign off here for this episode of The Last Round, Mike, go ahead and let them know where they can find us and follow us.
We are at The Last Round on Instagram and Twitter. And be sure to join us next week. We'll be previewing Tim Tszyu, Terrell Gausha, Berchelti's back, Lee Selby's back, and then also the Kiko Martinez v. Josh Warrington rematch for the IBF title.
So for my co-host, Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.